Welcome to the Sazmining podcast. At Sazmining, we are bringing you into conversations with today's industry leaders in blockchain and cryptocurrency. Our goal with this podcast is to improve the understanding and adoption of blockchain and cryptocurrency by giving you an insider's look at what's being built and informed predictions on what the future holds.
William Samasegi is the CEO and founder of Sazmining Inc. All opinions expressed by William or his guests on this podcast are solely their opinions and do not reflect the opinions of Sazmining. You should not treat any opinion expressed by William as a specific recommendation to make a particular investment or follow a particular strategy, but only as an expression of his opinion. This podcast is for informational purposes only.
Today's episode is sponsored by BlockFi and Cogent Law Group. Our listeners can visit blockfi.com/sazmining for an exclusive offer for cryptocurrency management, and check out Cogent Law Group for all your legal needs. This guest is a graduate of both Western University and the Ivey School of Business. He was a senior associate and consultant at KPMG Canada and later went on to become the CFO of UGE International, a global renewable energy company. He held the position of CFO of Hut Mining for nearly 2 years and recently stepped in as the interim CEO for the company. So with all that said, I'd like to welcome you, Jimmy, to the podcast.
Thank you, Will. Appreciate it.
So how is it that you ended up getting involved with cryptocurrency mining at Hut 8?
I first got interested in cryptocurrency, I remember around 2013 when I was living in Vancouver and the first ever Bitcoin ATM was there. And so created a lot of commotion and, people got a chance to get their first, their hands on Bitcoin. And it was quite complicated to get in around that time. And so that led me to read, Satoshi's white paper and really understand blockchain. But in my career, I hadn't stepped in at that point. It was very, very early. There weren't companies the size of Hut 8 or even fractions of that at that time. But generally in my career, I worked in infrastructure, focusing a lot on energy and traditional mining. And so with Bitcoin mining, most costs go towards electricity. So working in energy was very helpful there. And there's a lot of similarities being a public Bitcoin miner and a lot of the public gold mining companies I used to work with. And I've been traveled to a few of those gold mines in some interesting locations. And so it was a really good overlap that I would have never guessed would have led me to Bitcoin mining, but ended up being a really good path to get there. So I also enjoy working with early stage companies and early stage industries.
Well, in terms of mining companies that everyone sees in the news and in this space and industry, Hut 8 is one of those names that almost every single person who's a miner knows. And I guess just diving into how Hut 8 got to where it is today, can you talk a little bit about the backstory of how Hut 8 started and really reached that type of scale that all miners are going for?
Definitely. So Hut 8 started in 2017, which you can imagine, if you look at the chart of Bitcoin, it went parabolic, a lot of excitement and around Bitcoin, and people want to figure out how they can get in. And so in the Canadian markets, even North American in general, there are a lot of institutions and people that wanted access, but either didn't have the mandate to actually buy Bitcoin themselves. Of course, it's complicated setting up a Bitcoin mining system. And there's a lot of people that just didn't want to go through the efforts and the constraints of buying Bitcoin through mediums that they didn't know or trust at that time. And so Hut 8 had figured out how to set up that mining structure, how to have a system in Alberta with cheap electricity, and we hold our Bitcoin in a very safe way. And so what it does is it creates a platform and a structure for people to invest in the public markets and get exposure to Bitcoin through both mining and through holding Bitcoin. And so we've really leveraged that, and people want to have some holdings of Bitcoin exposure to that in their portfolio, and Hut 8's the easy way to do that.
Got it. And so it seems like you really capitalized also on the timing too, because it happened during that 2017 bull run. Is that something that you think that a mining company could do today, or it was a nature of how the industry was at that time with that big bull run?
Yeah, a combination. I think in 2017, the size that Bitcoin got to caught a lot of people off guard. And so there were a lot of people playing catch up and learning and understanding what Bitcoin is, and especially the institution. I think they were caught, realizing, wow, this is a great play, and we want to get involved. It's a completely new asset class here. Moving forward, I don't know if we're going to see as much of. It can still go parabolic, and all these things could still happen. But I think the knowledge of Bitcoin is definitely at a much higher level through a lot bigger companies now, and so there's still very big opportunities to capitalize again the way that we did. But I think it was something very special that happened around that time. That we're at the right time and right place.
It seemed like there were these institutions, they wanted exposure to Bitcoin. And rather than just going and buying exposure, you explained that they could get exposure by investing in actual mining equipment and the cash flow that's generated from the Bitcoin being mined. You guys became a public company, right?
The intention always, right from the formation of Hut 8, was to take us public. And so what we did, and the way that we sold it was that it would be public. You could get in and out very quickly. We really focused on that structure, which is what people really wanted, right? They just wanted a way to get exposure, to adjust their position as they needed, and that's what really was the compelling part to a lot of these institutions and individuals as well. I mean, it was across the spectrum, but really what took us off to a really big start were the institutions that wanted to get involved.
Got it. And when you were going and trying to raise the capital for Hut 8, what was that process? Because that's even earlier than where we are today, understanding what Bitcoin is, how the technology is, and how mining actually is a reliable way to generate revenue. So when you were going into those conversations, what were you pitching to these investors?
Yeah. So the big pitch was, you don't have to go through the mess of buying Bitcoin. There's a lot of constraints on these exchanges for how much you can buy. I mean, we raised over $100 million when we started this company, right? So it was very hard to amass that kind of exposure to Bitcoin at that time. And anyone who's in the industry probably remembers what the margins were like around that time. With Bitcoin taking off and just not that many manufacturers making this equipment, the margins were through the roof, right? So it was just massive demand. The demand far outstripped how much Hut 8 was trying to raise. And so we had to, we're talking big scale stuff, right? We're running 100 megawatts, and we had to limit how much we took in to how much power we had, and that's how much demand there really was. It was quite an interesting time, that's for sure.
Yeah, that's incredible. And those investors were people that you just had worked with in the past, or people that you went online, you looked through different investment mandates of these different investor funds, and then tried to pitch those firms in particular? How did you go about finding those investors who were participating in Hut 8?
Yeah, so Hut 8 knew a lot of these the people behind Hut 8. We knew a lot of the folks that ended up getting involved, but these are a good chunk of the funds that brought in were from some very large institutions, right? Like that's where the good chunk of the funds came in, and it's and there, of course, word gets out that because these are all public raises. So once word gets out that you start raising money, people don't want to miss out on the one company at that time that was going to be the Bitcoin miner, right? There wasn't that many people doing this. There was Hive who did it before us, but they weren't focused fully on Bitcoin. And so being an early entrant as one of the Bitcoin miners, almost sold itself at that time. And so that's how the demand grew so big.
Got it. And after you raise that capital, you have to find a way to actually deploy all of it into mining. So what was
Yeah.
the process like when you had gotten the capital in and you're now delivering on 100 megawatts of mining that you're trying to build for these institutions?
Yeah. So it all starts with a couple of things. So one very critical item is the electricity that we consume. And so we ended up with what I think is one of the most unique and better structures that I've seen out there. And so our main site in Medicine Hat, they're one of the unique places that actually the city runs their own grid. So most places you have a really big utility that it's very, you can't even negotiate really. And anyone who's kind of been in the room, there's very fixed rate structures and all that. And so working with a city that runs its own grid for a generation plant that they had just built, it was new, but they didn't have someone to take on that energy. So we went in and we said, we'll take all that energy and we'll run it 24/7. And they almost didn't believe us, right? Like this is because that's a dream to a lot of these electricity providers. And so we said, yeah, we'll come in, we'll take it all, and we set up a very unique structure specifically with the utility, which was the city with whom we rented the land off of and pay property taxes to, and we have a whole kind of structure and built a really good relationship with them. So we had that in place. The second key piece is the infrastructure and the chips. So, at the beginning, we're a very young and new company. So we teamed up with Bitfury, and Bitfury, they have a really good system for building these sites with just fixing up 40-foot sea containers to put the chips in there. They run. They're easily movable, mobile, and they run off. So they all get cooled off by a system of airflow. And so the way that they have built many of these, we use that insight that they have built. We used their, they were partners. They owned a big percentage of our company, so we had them aligned in terms of equity, and we're able to build ahead of schedule, under cost, this site, and so we got it all off the ground quite quickly. I'd say by early summer we had we started turning on boxes. So those are kind of the key pieces. We had the money, and before that we had the site and the chips lined up. We had precedent for how these would be built, and really tried to build a world-class site there, which we think we have.
Yeah, that's great. And that's a very smart approach to go and leverage the expertise of a company that's been operating and doing a lot of mining in the space as operational partners as well.
Definitely. Yeah, it was essentially, we provided a way to invest in an early stage company without some of that early stage risk, because we partnered with Bitfury and building it up, and they had some of the most experience in the industry.
Yeah, definitely. And then once you went through that initial deployment and had deployed that capital, did you guys go and try and raise additional capital or go through a cycle of upgrading that hardware? How did you approach that next phase after you were up and hashing?
Yeah, so we're pretty much there now, where after the halving, we're looking at modernizing a lot more of our equipment, and looking past into the next phase, past the next halving now. And so we did a raise recently in June for about 8.3 million, an oversubscribed deal, and so that fully 100% went towards upgrading our site with the different suppliers. So also to mention, Bitfury were great partners in getting off the ground, but eventually we saw a lot of value in being autonomous and buying from any supplier, right? And if that happens to be Bitfury, that's great, but it provides full flexibility to Hut 8 to operate in the best way for Hut 8. And so we teamed up with MicroBT on this most recent one, and we found the system that we built originally with Bitfury was flexible. So we were able to use any miners, and we had been testing them for quite a bit of time. Like MicroBT, purchased their equipment, and we're going to be installing those here quite soon. So we're excited to build some diversity within our site and keep growing and modernizing.
Yeah, and now right now you're the interim CEO of the firm, and you're really making those decisions on how the firm is going to move forward. And any CEO in any industry right now, on top of all the things that they traditionally had to balance, now there's the question of what's happening with COVID and how this is impacting your industry and your business. So with that said, how do you think COVID is going to impact the next year of cryptocurrency mining?
So there's a lot of effects through COVID, and at the beginning it was very tough because we saw a collapse in capital markets and Bitcoin price, and we were all really trying to figure out what's ahead and what's going to happen. And so we've seen things steady out since then. Bone was thrown to us, and then we saw cheaper electricity prices during that time, with obviously people staying at home. And in Alberta, it's a bit of a tougher time because they're quite reliant on the oil industry, and so we saw demand go down, we saw supply go up, and so prices fall for us, which was quite an opportune time, especially around the halving. And but long term, in terms of what this is going to do for the industry, what COVID and people staying at home and what we've already seen is this is progressing e-commerce and digital currencies and everything at a rate that we thought, it was going to happen much slower ahead of all this. And so I think in the long run, we're going to look back at this as, a time that people start getting more used to working with digital currencies and working through computers. And, we're doing this over Zoom right now. And so the amount that of comfort that people are getting with this, I think has been sped up greatly and is only positive for Bitcoin. And we've already seen a little bit of a run up in the price. And so who knows what will happen from here.
Yeah. You touched on a couple really interesting points there. One being the change in demand for electricity and how it could actually benefit a miner who's trying to secure lower electricity costs, which is very important for a mining operation. And then you also touched on the fact that we're recording this over Zoom, and remote work is really becoming much more of a norm. And it's something that I think many companies were afraid of initially, just because how are you all of a sudden going to get as much done when no one's going into the office? And it's just a completely different way about thinking how you can operate a company. But it goes to show that really a lot of the work that's being done nowadays, you can really do remote.
That's right. So adoption is just going through the roof for a lot of this stuff. And people who may have been reluctant, before this, really have no choice now. So it's just the new world we face, and I'm very happy to be focused on digital focused part of our society, being in Bitcoin.
Yeah, and aside from the electricity prices and just the norm of working remote, how do you think all the money printing that's happening globally is going to end up affecting Bitcoin, as it is seen by many to be a store of value asset? There are people who have different opinions on how the way that the central banks are acting is going to play out within the price of Bitcoin. Right.
So I think these are very connected things. So we've seen a lot happen since COVID really hit us, and we had shelter-in-place provisions and all these items, and the money printing is pretty unprecedented at this time. And we've actually seen the Fed come out, I think it was today, actually say they're going to commit to a plan of higher inflation than they have in the past, and we're going to see that across the world, including here in Canada where I am, and Bitcoin mimics a lot of the values and properties that gold has, just in a digital form. And so in so doing, it has a lot of anti-inflationary properties. And so we've already seen gold hit record highs in recent days. And Bitcoin, again, mimics these properties. And as we see more value come into the younger generation's hands, we've already seen that they would rather have a digital store of value than a physical store of value, like gold. And so we're going to see a generational shift there. We're going to see a shift in just people accepting Bitcoin generally, but it's a very responsible thing right now to be holding Bitcoin, gold as a part of your portfolio, given all the things going on in the world and the Fed just printing out money as fast as they can. And it's a crazy time, but it's a time that I think shows how important it is to hold something like Bitcoin.
Yeah. It seems like a lot of the trends happening today are actually beneficial for the people who are participating in this industry. But again, on the other side, there are also many challenges and things that might have changed the way that a miner or any other person building in this space might approach their business. So with that said, what are some of the biggest challenges that you're seeing today among cryptocurrency miners?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing that we have always facing us is just the volatility. It's the new asset class. We see people stepping in a big way and stepping out in a big way at different times based on different items. And just the nature of Bitcoin mining, you have these fluctuations in Bitcoin price, but you have network difficulty adjusting every 2 weeks. And so you have these mismatches that can occur. And what happens is, Bitcoin drops very rapidly, like it did in mid-March this year. It's very hard to run a profitable operation, and you have to think to yourself, is there going to rebound? How do we adjust our mining so that we can react to this? And beyond that, if just on the other side, if Bitcoin takes a complete run, which it has many times over its history, it's very profitable for a miner because it takes time for that adjust and the network difficulty to adjust. And so, we have to prepare ourselves for the worst in these scenarios, which means, keep a little bit more buffer, set up our contracts so that we can stay flexible and manage any sort of downturn. But we also have to make sure that we're locked and loaded, ready for any bull run, and to capitalize on those short periods of time that we can make a significant amount of money. And so preparing for, the best and worst and staying on your toes between that is always a difficult thing for a Bitcoin miner. That's number one. The other thing right now is the manufacturers of this equipment. As you can, if everyone remembers, end of 2017, we saw this big shoot up in Bitcoin price, and it was great margins for a good amount of time for Bitcoin miners. So then all the manufacturers tried to make as many of these miners as they possibly could, and just completely flooded the market. And the way that these miners work is you have to buy space in like Taiwan Semiconductors or Samsung to actually make these chips. And so they overloaded in terms of their anticipation of everything. And they got burned because they ended up with a bunch of equipment that they couldn't sell at that time. So it's a lot more of a steady hand moving forward with these equipment manufacturers. And so what we're seeing is the equipment that they make goes into the few hands that have those relationships. But there are delays, and it's just it's very hard to get your hand on the latest equipment because it is so. They've limited their production so to ensure that they can manage their cash flows as well. So a lot of nuances in this industry to kind of always stay on top of.
Yeah, definitely. And that first topic that you talked about, creating a buffer, how are you going to buffer for when times are tough, and how are you going to allocate those additional resources when times are good to make sure that you're ready when times go south again?
Yeah.
Do you guys have any sort of protocol for how you're planning that, or is it something that is just kind of how you're feeling and the trends that you're seeing in that moment?
Yeah. So I can't get into all the specifics on it, but it's a conversation that is continuously ongoing. It's something that's very important to us to make sure that we're thinking through that buffer at different times in our history. And so the result is quite simple, right? We just have to make sure we're holding enough cash in our bank account to make sure that we have an X amount of days that we can handle our expenses. And so as long as those X amount of days are far longer, that we can handle expenses than what we think a downturn could be. And we're talking, a month, 2-3 months, depending on the time frame. That's the core of the way we think about it from a buffer. And we're obviously always holding Bitcoin and setting up our contracts that allow some level of flexibility so that we can push out things by a month if need be, and staying. And we also have a very lean team as well, right? So we make sure that we want to be as low cost of a Bitcoin miner as you can, kind of similar to the gold industry. You want to be a low cost producer, and so what that allows you to do is during tough times, you find ways to toggle up and toggle down as needed, and your core expenses remain very low.
Got it. Yeah, that's a smart approach, and it's interesting to see how you guys build in that buffer and have that timeline so you're able to weather any sort of storm that might come.
Exactly, and we've had many. There's been many of them. So, and we're still around, operating strong. So it's been working well. But of course, you're always dropping a few sweats whenever you see some big movements down or up. And even when it's going up, you're making sure that you're capitalizing on that as much as possible.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you just are always checking the price. You always are seeing where the market's at, and then seeing how the difficulty is, and then making sure that you're aware of it. So if any major changes happen, you're ready to act.
Oh yeah, it's always flashing on my screen. There's very rarely a time that I'm not checking the Bitcoin price.
Yeah, great. Yeah, it's part of like the routine now where I wake up in the morning, I'll check the email, and then next thing that gets clicked open is the price.
I can relate. It's people think you're crazy, but then when you realize how much is on the line here, it's critical, right?
Yeah, definitely. Especially because our revenue is directly tied to that number in terms of the price of Bitcoin. So we really like to see when it's going up.
100%. It's and we have a whole matrix. Like, we actually monitor it minute by minute, and because we have fluctuations in energy price, we have fluctuations in difficulty, and fluctuation in Bitcoin price. So we know exactly, and we also have eco mode, full mode, and like different modes that we can throttle on our machines. And so we have so many different kind of variables in the mix that we're always updating that on a real-time basis, making sure we're maximizing our profitability. So it gets complicated, and there's like always people looking at it. We're making sure that's always being done correctly. So it's interesting that way, right? Like that's the part you have to always stay on your toes and making sure that you're thinking about things the right way.
And another area that I actually am really curious to talk with you about is in the financial products world, where a lot of these products currently are being created for institutions, whether it be options or futures. And many miners, whenever I speak with them, they are aware of these financial products that are being created, but they're not actively participating quite yet because they haven't reached a certain scale or size within their mining capabilities or their team where they're really interested in participating in those sorts of hedging activities. And you guys are one of those companies that are very large where you have the hash rate, but the question is, are you actively doing any sort of hedging or trading, or is that something that is on your radar and you're thinking about getting involved at some point in the future, but not yet actively trading those financial products?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So we're active. I always look at the futures markets. I think it it helps paint the picture of the Bitcoin market and the optimism that's built in and how people are thinking of Bitcoin. But so I'm always keeping an eye on it. I've had many discussions on it, but my view in terms of Hut 8 is that people invest in Hut 8 to get full exposure to Bitcoin. And so, it would hurt me to put something in place that could limit the upside, and also thinking about it, spending money and making a bet to limit the downside too, right? And they have these fencing things where you can have limited cost outlay and have limited downside, limited upside, but it's not really what we've been selling, right? We are the exposure to Bitcoin through the good times and through the bad times. And so our stock has gone up and down with Bitcoin price as needed. And if Bitcoin's down, people get it that we're hurting. And if Bitcoin's up, they get it that we're doing really well, right? And so we don't have to explain that as much. And so, and I've taken a page out of the gold mining industry. They've, over their history, they have experimented with hedging, and those are very low cost hedges, especially compared to Bitcoin. And thankfully, the cost of hedging in Bitcoin has come way down. Like, it's very impressive, the fees for it now. But in the gold industry, yeah, again, you saw these some firms hedging, some firms didn't. And now almost all do not hedge. And the reason why is because they want to provide that maximum upside. And I think, again, they've stood the test of time. They've kind of tested both. And I think we're providing similar exposure, just to a different asset. And so I don't see us using hedges in the near future, but we always stay open-minded, and we're always taking a look at it, and it's always an option, but we just don't see it happening in the near future.
Got it. Yeah, and you touched on a really interesting point there too, with the analogy between gold mining and cryptocurrency mining. Obviously, gold mining's been around a lot longer than the type of mining that we're doing for digital assets. So in that regard, do you see similarities in the two on that might give insight into how cryptocurrency mining might play out based on what's happened in the traditional gold industry and consolidation among some of those firms as time went on? Or do you think that Bitcoin and cryptocurrency mining will play out in a different sort of way that is unprecedented from the gold perspective?
Yeah, so I think there are a lot of similarities now. While Bitcoin's still in its kind of frontier phase, but I do see it taking a different direction over time. Because really, what we're providing as a miner is infrastructure for the security of the Bitcoin blockchain, and so this is a core part of what's needed for the Bitcoin blockchain, and it's going to be better understood over time as these players get much bigger into estimating what the potential revenues is for Bitcoin miners are, especially as Bitcoin starts to become less volatile. And so I see Bitcoin mining eventually becoming a little bit more of a, starting to have similarities with something like a utility as well, where it has steady, and you have an investment, you have a good idea of what that return is going to be. You're going to have major companies, and it's going to be considered an infrastructure play on some level. With the steady return, with if we're a public company, we can have steady dividends and something along those lines. But that Bitcoin has to go a very long way to get there, and so we're going through the cycles similar to gold, and there's a lot of factors that depend on this. If we actually see Bitcoin become the storage of value, and see some governments embrace it on some level, then you're going to see a lot more of a steady price, and Bitcoin miners becoming a lot more of an infrastructure play. But it's still to be seen in a big way.
Yeah, that is a very fascinating prediction there. That was the first time that I think I've heard that prediction, and the way that you tied in the utilities and also the aspect on volatility of Bitcoin. You think that we're going to reach a point where Bitcoin's volatility is much lower than it is today, where you're reaching a much more stable type of price?
It's so hard to say. I hope it does. I hope you see a lot of stability in Bitcoin over time, where governments, people can rely on it to not only hold it as a storage of value, but as a way to actually transact with some level of comfort, right? And so you're going to need to see, again, governments really embracing it, and you're going to need to see a certain level of adoption to get there. Which again, I don't think this is a medium to long term view, but it's something that is definitely a possibility in our future, and something I hope to see. Like I hope that's the future we have with Bitcoin. And even gold is more volatile than, and the reason why gold goes up and Bitcoin goes up so much is because the dollar goes down, goes down in value through inflation. And
Yeah.
so, and so we want to see less of that inflation, because that inflation really hurts savers, right? It's the people who just put money in their bank account and want to see them save money for something that they want to buy in 10 years. But it's, governments print money, and it's essentially a tax on the savers, in devaluing that and putting that money elsewhere. And so I'd rather see less of that inflation tax on savers, and people be more comfortable putting their money in things like gold and Bitcoin as a storage of value, so they can actually have real savings, right? Like that's the whole core of it, right? And so the more stable Bitcoin is, and a storage of value is available to people, the more these people can trust in it to save money. But of course, the government's a little bit disincentivized to do that, because they don't want people leaving the dollar, right? That hurts the dollar. So there's a little bit of a adversarial view there between the two.
Yeah. And one of the core messages and value propositions of Bitcoin is this aspect of decentralization. And that's something that Hut 8's a part of, Sazmining's a part of, any other cryptocurrency mining company. We're all supporting the Bitcoin network. And if tomorrow you guys wanted to change the ledger or corrupt the system of the amount of Bitcoin that each person holds, you can't do it individually, and neither can any other miner, because you have that decentralization. And this leads to the point that I've been discussing with a handful of other miners is, right now we're seeing decentralization among mining companies. We see more mining companies popping up, and we see very large mining companies gathering larger amounts of hash power. But the overall network continues to grow. More and more miners, more and more hash power come onto the network. I've heard a couple of different answers to this question that I'm about to ask. The question is, in the future, do you see a future where you truly have continued decentralization of the Bitcoin mining network? Or are you seeing a future where it could be a mix, I guess anywhere in between, completely centralized with one person, one entity controlling everything, and completely decentralized? Where do you think the Bitcoin mining industry is going to fall along that spectrum of decentralization?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So I think people are starting now to realize the importance of Bitcoin in our global society. And I think that's only going to grow. Like, people are going to realize that individuals across the world are going to be drawn towards something like Bitcoin, and it's a need that we're not going to be able to hold back. And so, given that importance of Bitcoin is going to be understood and realized, I think it's going to be almost it's a security thing, that there's going to be a spread of mining capabilities around the world to ensure that decentralization exists. So it's kind of for two different reasons. One, you want those profits in your country, and you want that security in your own country as well. Like, if you think for a second the U.S. is going to fall behind in this stuff, it's you're already seeing money specifically wanting to come to North America, so that hash power comes here. And so you're already starting to see that. And I think people, and this is kind of on an individual level. Eventually, I think you're going to see this from regulatory level, that you're going to want more security and more hash power in each country, and a lot of countries are going to have this. And so, although I think that hash power is going to be between fewer hands, I think you're going to have a lot of the global powers hold a good chunk between each of them to have that hash power, and thereby having that security over the system. And I just don't think at any point in the future we're going to see any one country or any one company reach over 50%. You're going to have people with their hands up with that if that does happen. So and also, it benefits this is the core thing that I think people forget. It benefits everyone for it to be decentralized, right? If you're a holder of Bitcoin and you want to screw over the system, all that Bitcoin you have is going to be worthless, right? Because it's a fully transparent system. So you're going to know immediately if there's some funny business going on, which is very rare and complicated and hard to do. But if someone actually goes and ventures to do that, it's not going to benefit them, right? It takes a lot of capital, it takes a lot of effort, and if they hold Bitcoin, which is the store of a lot of value, that's all going to be gone for them. So I just don't see the incentive for anyone even wanting to do that.
Yeah, that's interesting, and it does make sense how each country will, in its own way, be acquiring hash power as they try and attract that capital and those miners to come and mine Bitcoin in their own country.
And obviously lots of things can happen, but that's already the trend I'm already seeing, right? And so you're going to have all these countries that want in because they're going to realize Bitcoin's going to be valuable down the road, right? So might as well have a lot of that knowledge and expertise where they are. So you're already seeing a lot of the global powers wanting mines in their country. Seeing this already and seeing that importance already, I think that's only going to grow.
Yeah. And this is one of the topics that's extremely popular. Anytime you talk with anyone about blockchain, it's how is the government or the jurisdiction that you're in going to approach your industry? And we've seen different types of approaches, particularly when we're speaking about potential options and futures trading and these different companies that could offer those types of financial products. There were certain jurisdictions that gave more of a green light to the companies building in those industries, whereas other countries might have had the companies slow down or go through more regulatory hurdles to actually go and offer those products and services. So diving in particularly on the mining front, what do you see as something that you think governments should do to incentivize miners to build mines in their country?
I think the biggest thing is it's just opening up their regulations in tailoring things to allow blockchain and Bitcoin infrastructure to build. Like I don't think the government needs to go out of their way to incentivize. I think there's more than enough ways to incentivize people to set up mining infrastructure, and especially given how much power is taken and how much they rely on 24/7 uptime and the jurisdiction that they are operating in. There are people that just want to operate where they're in good jurisdictions, right? Like you get very cheap energy in Venezuela. It's just Venezuela where you want to set up a mining operation and invest $100 million. Maybe for some people, yes, but for a lot of people, they're going to want to go to those good jurisdictions. And so I think it's just, as long as you are in, like, for example, Alberta, we've found has been very crypto friendly and a great place for us to mine. We find other people going there. And so just being open-minded to a new industry, not being scared of it in any way. We find fear that comes up as kind of a first reaction because they're like, oh, we don't know what it is. The moment they start understanding and we explain it out to them, they realize this is a good thing to have in your backyard. Like this is something you want in your country, in your state, or whatever. And also just beyond that, I think the more that the government allows opening of the ability for people to build out infrastructure for blockchain and Bitcoin just means the more people use it and understand it and be happy and also invest in mining in their backyard. Like, for example, it was a bit of I heard a lot of things on both sides of the aisle on this one, but the SEC allowed or the U.S. government allowed U.S. banks to hold crypto for individuals. And so people, I heard people on one side of the aisle saying, well, we don't want institutions holding our Bitcoin. It's not needed. But on the other side, it makes this easier for some people who may not be comfortable holding it in their own, treasure wallet in their back pocket or in a vault. They trust these institutions and they're happy to do that. So I think these are the things governments need to do more of and just open it up. It's inevitable that this is all going to happen. So the more we can think ahead and and allow for this infrastructure to build up ahead of other countries, just means we're more at an advantage.
Yeah. And this is actually, I think, applies very well to innovation and applies very well to our particular industry when you just look back at how far we've come since the start of Bitcoin in 2009. Many times people overestimate what can be achieved in 1 year, but underestimate what can be achieved in 10. And if you were looking at the cryptocurrency mining industry in particular, how do you think it's going to look 10 years from now?
It's a good question, and so what I think it's going to look like is a lot of what I hope it looks like as well. So what I'd like to see is more governments and individuals embracing Bitcoin as a storage Value, and even to the level of holding reserves of Bitcoin, similar to the way that they used to hold gold. Obviously, this will provide massive value upside to Bitcoin, and it's also part. I mean, the thing I always give is gold. I haven't seen a recent number, but I think it's over $7 trillion market cap for gold, and a lot is held in reserves, right, as storage of value. Bitcoin is in the hundreds of billions. So if you really think of Bitcoin ever taking that position, there's a lot of upside there, right? And then when you also factor in scarcity, 10 years, you have 2 more halvings between that time frame, right? So you're gonna have very little new Bitcoin that is going to be entering the market, so the scarcity is also going to jump up. So you're going to see some level of a wealth transfer that happens as Bitcoin becomes more adopted, and there's going to be a lot of the naysayers that hold out and miss out there. So that's one of the things, and that's the storage value piece. The other piece is the adoption side of things. And so we're already seeing level 2 or layer 2 blockchain technology starting to come out, and it's not really here in North America much, but things like the Lightning Network and people finding ways to transact much more quickly than Bitcoin Core on its own allows you to, right? You need to wait 20 minutes for a transaction to settle, which is great when compared to a wire transfer, especially when you transfer the costs between it, but not great when you're buying a cup of coffee. So we're seeing Microsoft, Starbucks, a lot of companies entering into this field and trying to solve these problems of how we can use Bitcoin and grow the adoption in many different areas. So I think we're going to make massive progress, considering already these big companies are already behind it. And I think North America is there's already so many places in the world that they don't even have ways to do it in the traditional systems. Like people, it's hard to get bank accounts in Africa and transact that way. I think, the same way in India, where people, it was too hard to set up a phone infrastructure, so no one had landlines. A lot of the country didn't have landlines; they just went straight to cell phones, right? You're going to see the same thing in lots of parts of the world where, some people don't even need banks, right? They can deal completely in cryptocurrencies and without even needing that whole infrastructure that was there before. So I think there's, so Jack Dorsey sees a lot of that potential there, and he's obviously got 2 big companies below him that can make big moves, right? So again, we're already seeing a lot of this stuff. So momentum's already building up for that 10-year mark where we can travel around the world, use our kind of reserve Bitcoin holdings that we have, and transact anywhere we want very easily, very securely, and a lot of upside in it. And most importantly, in my opinion, is provide average people a way to save money. There's nothing that hurts me more. Like I used to live in South America. I used to live in Chile, right beside Argentina, where inflation got up as high, over 50%. So I mean, someone saves $100 for their kids' college fund, and that's worth the next year $50, right? Or at least their purchasing power drops so significantly. And so much of the world way to save in a better way. Like it's just not a fair system all over the world. And so I'd like to see more people have a chance at kind of breaking out of their current economic situation much more easily, I think Bitcoin's a great way to do that.
Yeah, 100%. And I do think that that's a great way for people who might not necessarily be working full time like we are in this industry to still find a way
Yeah.
to protect their wealth, have some of their wealth in Bitcoin. And when those payment methods get better and more mature, there are actually cards that people can use now to find a way to easily pull from their Bitcoin wallet and pay, almost
Yeah.
like a debit card. But I think the infrastructure is still getting better and better. So ideally, we'll have some options where you could have something like an Amex, except it's pulling from your Bitcoin.
Exactly right. Exactly right. I mean, it's far better if you don't have to deal with any exchange fees,
Yeah,
right? Like just deal, people are just happy accepting Bitcoin, right? Like there's nothing more to the story than that, right? There's no question of how do you get it back to US dollars or whatever other currency. It's just you're happy holding Bitcoin and you're happy spending Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's the ideal future that I can see, especially for international transactions. You're really kind of seeing that. I don't know exactly how much the adoption is, but between Caribbean countries, it's actually really hard to transact. They all have different currencies, different systems, and it's not easy to open up a US dollar account there, as far as I've been told. And so people have resorted to cryptocurrencies because it's just a common way to transact.
I'd like to thank BlockFi for sponsoring today's episode. BlockFi provides wealth management products for crypto investors. I personally hold my crypto with BlockFi because they pay me up to 6.2% interest annually on all of my crypto holdings. At Sazmining, we've hooked up all of our listeners with a special sign-up bonus. All you have to do is go to blockfi.com/Sazmining and sign up. Again, visit blockfi.com/Sazmining for an exclusive bonus offer. It's a no-brainer to earn additional interest with BlockFi. Today's episode is also made possible by Cogent Law Group. Finding reliable legal representation in blockchain is one of the biggest challenges when building a business. You need to make sure that you work with a law firm that understands the legal frameworks that apply to the industry and has the ability to strategically help you grow your business. When researching law firms for Sazmining, I found that Cogent Law Group checked all of the boxes. Not only do their lawyers have expert level experience, but they also understand the blockchain industry. Cogent Law Group gives you access to high-end lawyers without breaking the bank.
First question is, what is your favorite book?
I was thinking about. I mean, I'll give you a Bitcoin one, and I'll give you, another one I read recently that I absolutely love. So, something I think that anyone interested in Bitcoin should read is the Bitcoin Standard, and written by Safieddine Ammous. I was lucky enough to meet him, and just a great book on the history of money, what made gold money over many iterations and many years, and why Bitcoin is something special in that context. So recommend that for the Bitcoin lovers. And then mainly because I'm a nerd, a book I read recently that was amazing. It was The Future of Humankind, Future of Humanity. It was called, written by Michio Kaku. And it talks about humankind and our, the Earth is not going to last forever. Neither is our sun. And I know this is obviously not just our lives, but eventually humankind has to think about being interplanetary and exploring, right? Like just as a species, we've always wanted to know what was over the hill on the other side, right?
Yeah.
And so I've never read a book that talks so succinctly about the next steps and how we'll become exploring space and going to other planets and all that kind of stuff. And it talks about some amazing ideas that are both near term, medium term, and really crazy long term concepts. So if you're into that kind of stuff, strongly recommend it. Great book. Really mind expanding, like really puts things into perspective for you.
Yeah, and that was by Kaku, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Theoretical physicist. He's a face that's kind of known in that space.
Yeah, he's got a lot of great videos on YouTube also. I've watched a couple of his lessons.
Yeah, no, I think that's where that's where I first piqued my interest and looked into him and found this book. I forget it was like Big Think or something on YouTube that
Yeah.
that he has some really cool videos.
Yeah. Yeah. What was the most interesting thing that you learned in his book, or just one of those things that when you read it, it just opened your mind?
I've learned a lot about just even through like Elon Musk and a lot of the near term things that we're thinking about how to get interplanetary, but what it actually takes to go interstellar, so to go visit another solar system, is mind boggling, right? So not only are you going to need kind of or would want stepping stones to get there, whether it's moons on Jupiter to comets in the outer outskirts of our solar system, and kind of little jumping spots to get there, and also just the concepts of building self-replicating robots to go out in these very dangerous areas. There's lots of radiation to build out that infrastructure and get ahead of that. And I relate it to how there was a project of building out the DNA and understanding it, and eventually solve that, which is incredible, right? And that's kind of the basis for a lot of genetic research that we have. Well, we're doing the same thing, the same project going through the mind. We're trying to map out every single neuron in the brain, and so it's kind of like the similar concept, but you actually have to think about how hard that must be to actually map everything out. And there's lots of teams doing that, and the end goal could eventually mean that you could download consciousness, right?
Yeah.
And maybe that's the easier way to go out there is just send that out there to space and and explore that way. So some very very out there things are in this book, but the way that he puts it all together is incredible.
Listening to his name is Ray Kurzweil.
Singularity.
And he's a big futurist, and that was one of the things that he mentioned. Some of the technologies that he thought were going to happen within our lifetime. It was just mind-boggling how quickly he thinks some of these things are going to happen. One of those being the technology that you just mentioned, which would be the ability to download consciousness, but and so essentially being able to upload your consciousness to the cloud, and then therefore, in your example, being able to, I guess, send that to another planet. That's very, very interesting.
Yeah, no, I mean, Kurzweil, as far as I've heard, genuinely thinks he's going to be immortal through this.
Yeah.
Like he's almost banking on it. Very interesting guy as well. It's I love kind of thinking about all the potential outcomes or all alternatives of our future. So it's and obviously it's in line and probably part and parcel to my interest in Bitcoin, right? As a key part of our future as a society.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the interest in these types of topics it really draws in a lot of people to areas like Bitcoin, blockchain, technology, because there's so much that you can keep digging deeper and deeper into all these topics. Like, of course, blockchain and Bitcoin, but then these other topics of space travel, becoming interplanetary as a species, and then just upgrading the human intellect with some of these things that Neuralink's working on. And
yes, exactly.
And who knows where that's going to go, really.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, some of it can get almost scary, right? Thinking about the potential of it all. And a very interesting book here into that is Homo Deus by Yuval Harari, and so he gets into kind of some of those kind of spooky future alternatives in the same light that we're thinking right now.
Yeah. After reading that book, I mean, I'd heard about the simulation theory before reading it.
It's like in the future, we would want to understand alternatives and make simulations at some point.
Yeah.
In our future, but I haven't seen it.
I think that was the biggest jump in any of the assumptions too. Like, that was like the biggest leap. The other one was just like you have an unlimited time horizon, and the third assumption in it is that you'd always be able to make an incremental improvement on technology,
right, at
any point in time. So if you're under the assumption that you're always going to be able to make some type of improvement to tech, and then you have an unlimited time horizon, and then the assumption that you started off with is that we're going to end up wanting to run simulations at some point in the future.
Exactly, the desire's there.
Yeah.
It's it's super interesting, right? Because I mean, you really never know, right? It makes you question everything.
Yeah, it really does. And then when you think about everything that's possible, you just think that Bitcoin's got to reach mass adoption with the way that technology is moving, with the way that
Yeah,
things are progressing. There's going to be a continuous improvement and a better way to approach money and value and the transfer of value. And a system is as inflationary and can devalue the holdings of people within a society as the
yeah.
way that the current system's set up. It's I'm not hating on the existing system. I'm just saying that there's ways to make it better now. And
Exactly right. Yeah, I think the question is just embracing what we've seen work in Bitcoin, and again, we've already seen a lot of that start to happen. And I think once you get to a certain critical level, floodgates more or less open, and there's no stopping it at that point, right? Like you start getting real mass adoption. It just becomes part of everyday lives, and there's no point in stopping it, right? Like we've already seen so much success. There's still a long way to go. We're not there yet, but we're moving in the right direction. That's for sure.
in just over 10 years, when Bitcoin started, it started from a white paper to the entire industry that we see today. I mean,
Yeah,
in another 10, 20 years, I mean, it's hard to imagine where it will be.
exactly right. Exactly right. Yeah, and I'm sure, just like you said, we will probably overshoot the next year, but it'll probably be hard to comprehend how far it'll go the next 10, 20 years. It's fun to think about. That's for sure. It's the potential is huge for this,
Yeah.
and I think people are starting to realize it now. But still, again, it's a slow crawl.
When you zoom in and you see the day-to-day activities happening, it can always feel like things are moving too slowly, or you wish things
Yeah,
would move faster. But then when you take a few steps back and see what's actually going on in the entire industry and what's happening with the company, I mean, it's incredible what just a few years can do.
yeah. The best way to think about, like, just thinking about when we started this company to now, and how much the industry and Bitcoin has come, is really mind-boggling. Like, there's times where we couldn't even get a bank account, right? Now there's multiple banks to choose from. If we want a loan, it would have been next to impossible. Now there are many lenders, right? Like, in terms of the custodians. I mean, U.S. banks are going to start stepping into it. Fidelity, one of the largest asset managers in the world, is now setting up their own custodian. Like, it's just gotten to a point now that it feels so far away from when, I in a big way stepped into the industry. So that's just that short time. It's easy to forget that, but it's important to remember that we are moving, and we are moving in the right direction.
Yeah, well, that's great. Thanks again for coming on this
Yeah.
episode. And I guess the last thing is, are there any places on social media or online where you want to let all the listeners be able to connect with you or the company?
Sure. First of all, thank you so much for having me. It was great chatting with you, Will, and we'll obviously keep in touch and maybe do this again sometime. In terms of ways to connect with me, on our website has our email. It's jimmy@howdaymind.com, and I got to get more active on social media, but my Twitter handle is at Jim, Jim, and then first part of my last name, so Baio. So Jim Baio.
Great. Well, thanks again. This was a lot of fun. We'll definitely have to do it again soon.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Sazmining podcast. Be sure to follow us on social media and YouTube for the latest updates and previews of upcoming episodes. Full episodes and transcripts can be found on sazmining.com every Thursday. If you want to hear us interview a particular guest on a future episode, please reach out to us at podcast@sazmining.com.